Welcome to another session of Curious Minds, a weekly forum where we explore ways to stretch our imaginations and to imagine a range of new topics. We are really in for a treat today. It's my pleasure to acknowledge that we have invited Geoffrey West to join us. Geoffrey comes from a rich background of experience of both theoretical physics and theoretical biology. He previously was the president at Santa Fe Institute. He is an internationally recognized expert in the future of cities and the intricate systems, whether living or not, and can help us understand how these seemingly unrelated things associated with nature and cities all obey similar scaling laws. And I know many of you have heard reference to his most recent publication, the book Scale. And so I'm sure he will share with us some of the insights that he wrote about in that book as well, and will help us think about how we can, again, stretch our imaginations and our minds to imagine how cities and things scale according to nature's laws. So without further ado, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Geoffrey West.
Oh, thanks, Ken. Thanks. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I have one small thing that I have to say before I begin. I prepared a talk that was too long, so you'll have to bear with me as I will, in real time, flip through a few things. It'll be a bit hokey, but hopefully you'll indulge me. So let me bring up the first slide, which is a title I made up for this. And those are the kind of topics I'm going to discuss. And it sort of allows me to discuss almost anything. But you can see it's very much a big picture. I'm going to give a very big picture view of many things that you're very familiar with. But at the back of it is a major question, which is part of a different title that I was originally going to use, which is even more maybe pretentious and challenging, and that is about the future of the planet and the whole question of global sustainability. Because thinking about the way life works, the way ecosystems work, the way cities work, the way society works, the way companies work, are all integrated into the question of the future of the globe and the socioeconomic kind of system that we've evolved. And I come to it, as was already indicated by Ken's introduction, as a physicist who has worked on quarks and gluons and string theory and dark matter and so on. So I come to it trying to determine whether we can actually start to develop a serious science of these things, in the sense of being science here meaning quantitative, predictive, based on principles, mathematizable, computable, and possibly even predictable. So I have done a lot of work, as I said, in physics, but I've also done a lot of work in fundamental biology, and I will touch on that shortly as we go along. But I first want to set the scene and remind you of many things that you already know about, but put them into a slightly different perspective. And the first thing I want to remind you of is that we live in an exponentially expanding socioeconomic universe. And I've got some numbers here to illustrate it. 200 years ago, when the US was founded, we were predominantly agricultural and rural, and now we are over 80% urbanized. The world crossed the halfway mark just a few years ago and is headed towards that 80% urbanization. And just to put that in perspective, that's equivalent to, if you just do a simple averaging from now to the mid-century, that's equivalent to urbanizing every week almost 1.5 million people, which is equivalent to adding a New York metropolitan area every couple of months, a Detroit every few days, or a Finland every month. That's what's going on now. That's what's going on around us. And that puts enormous stresses and strains on everything from obviously things like energy and resources, water, and so forth. But also, of course, on the social fabric, and maybe at the end I'll talk about that. China, another example, was very slow to urbanize, has crossed the halfway mark and is headed towards this 70-80% level. But of course, so is Africa and Latin America and so forth. So this is an ongoing phenomenon. It looks like there's nothing there, but there is actually something there. That is actually a picture taken by a satellite in the year I was born. I was born in 1940. Of course, that's nonsense. There's no satellites in 1940. But from the time that picture was mythically taken to now, that's what's happened to the planet. It's gone from being almost dark to glowing fantastically. And all of that represents cities. All of that is cities. And that is, of course, a reflection of the faster than exponential growth of the population. It shot up. This is beginning back when we first started to urbanize 10,000 years ago. And the shooting up, of course, was driven by the Industrial Revolution, the discovery of fossil fuels, of stored energy that we've learned how to exploit, and of course the invention and discovery of entrepreneurship and capitalism. And it's led to this phenomenal society in which we all have the privilege to participate. And so the paradigm that we exist in now is one of open-ended growth, and I will come back and talk about that towards the end. But the point I really want to make is the sort of one that's almost obvious, is the fate of the planet in terms of our lives is bound up with the fate of cities. And so it's incumbent upon us to try and understand what that phenomenon is. What is this? We know what it looks like. We know some of the things that induce us to come to cities: greater opportunities, greater material well-being, greater access to kind of a sexy, buzzier life, culture and fancy restaurants and good education. But all of that, of course, can't exist without energy, driven by energy. And the most fundamental law of science is the second law of thermodynamics, which says that if you transform energy, if you do this to make this, then you create entropy. If you create great order, somewhere you have to create disorder, and there's no way around that. That is the second law of thermodynamics, unintended consequences. And that creates something I want to call socioeconomic entropy, which are things like this, and this, and this, all the things you're very familiar with. These are all constructs that are unintended consequence of this fantastic phenomenon that we've invented of creating order out of disorder, but we create more disorder, and including things like this, social unrest. And the question is that what many of our cities will look like in the future? Many around the globe do look like this in some form, but are all cities going to look like this, or is this going to be the result of it? Are we going to have horrible effects from climate change? And I'll come back to that. So when we think of cities, we usually think of them in their physicality. That is, we think of them in terms of the roads and the buildings and the infrastructure. But of course, a city is not only much more than that, it is essentially that of the people. It is in fact the integration between the infrastructure and the social interaction among people. Maybe this is a way of illustrating it. There you see something that the infrastructure that's been there for over 2,000 years, and the people have been doing effectively what they're doing here, sitting around, interacting, creating ideas, exchanging information, most of which is useless and pointless except to them, but occasionally out of what the process of what is going on there, and that is provided by the stage that we call the city, occasionally out of that comes the theory of relativity, or quantum mechanics, or a Google, or a Microsoft, or a Ford. That's what happens because this is what a city is. A city is a machine for facilitating interaction, for creating wealth, creating ideas. And so here's another, is New York City, 120 years ago. The buildings are still there, the people, those people are gone, new people have come, but the same essence of what is going on there is still going on in New York and is making it the greatest city in the world. So a city can be thought of as the integration between, on the one hand, its physicality, represented by energy and the infrastructure, and the information exchange, which is embedded in its social networks. And I've written down the sort of biological equivalents of those, metabolism on the one hand versus genomics on the other. So from this viewpoint, all of the problems, the tsunami of problems that we seem to face on the planet today, from climate change to questions of financial markets and risk, the questions of energy and resources, the questions of health and pollution and so on, all of these have come about because of the exponential increase in urbanization. So on the one hand, cities and urbanization are the problem, but on the other, they are the solution, because cities are this vacuum cleaner that have sucked up people, the smart people, all ideas are created in the city, wealth is created in the city, and so on. So just to repeat what I said, that means that in order to understand the long-term future of the planet, we need to understand cities. And the usual way we think about cities and the way we've dealt with these problems is to put boxes around them, and I've just arbitrarily drawn some boxes around various of the things that you're familiar with. But inside those boxes, you could draw boxes around each one of these, and usually we think of addressing questions of health in one way, we think of energy in another, transport in another, and so forth. And so it is, we stovepipe, but in fact what we recognize is that each one of these is of itself a highly complex, evolving, adaptive system interacting with all the other systems, and the system as a whole is in fact a complex adaptive system made up of these multiple complex adaptive systems. They are not independent, and one of the things one learns when one studies this is that if one only concentrates on one, ignoring the others, the unintended consequences usually lead to deleterious effects. And that's been the history of dealing with many of the kinds of social issues that I will try to address shortly. So if we're going to develop a science of cities, and of companies for that matter, and of sustainability, it can't be like Newton's laws, where you can derive things to arbitrary accuracy, so that the cars that Ford produces work, the iPhones that Apple produces work, because they're based on Newton's laws, Maxwell's equations, things that have that we can calculate to great precision. That is not the nature of a complex adaptive system, precisely because it is continually changing. So a different approach needs to be made, but it can still be quantitative and it can still be predictive, but in what I want to call a coarse-grained way. And I want to give you an example. So here are coarse-grained questions. So why is it that I can say with certainty everybody in this room is going to be dead in 100 years? And some of us will be dead in less. Why is it 100 years and not a few years like a mouse, or 150 years like a whale? Where do these numbers come from? What is the time frame that allowed this to happen? What is going on here? Why did everybody have to sleep about 8 hours a day? So these are coarse-grained questions, and the answer to them will be coarse-grained in the sense that we won't be able to predict how long an individual may live, but we ought to understand what sets the scale of each of our lifespans. So similarly, why is it that cities keep growing, whereas all companies effectively stop? And I will come back to that shortly. Or why is it that all companies eventually disappear, essentially, whereas, and as all do organisms, but cities seem to continually grow. So if I leave myself time, I'll try to get back to this. So what in the hell happened here? What happened to them? And why is it also that the pace of life, as all these things proceed, seems to get faster and faster and is there any of it sustainable? So I want to spend just a few minutes talking about us, biology first, because it takes it out of the context of one's prejudices about socioeconomic systems. So we're one of these. We're a mammal, and mammals cover a size range of a few grams up to 100 million grams, 8 orders of magnitude in size, 100 million. And each one is evolved in its own unique way, with its own unique history. And so you would have expected, if I measure anything about them, and I plotted it on a graph versus their size, the points would lie so almost randomly all over the graph, reflecting their evolutionary history. Quite to the contrary, this is the metabolic rate of animals. Metabolic rate for these purposes just means how much food you need each day to stay alive versus size. And what you can see when plotted this way, and it's plotted what's called logarithmically, for those not familiar, meaning, as you can see on the axis, it goes up by factors of 10, 1, 10, 100, and so on. And we do that because you can't put a mouse and an elephant on a linear plot, because if I put a mouse on a point here, and I did it linearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 grams, the elephant, or the whale anyway, would be in Ann Arbor or somewhere. So in order to get it on the same graph, we have to plot it in this going up by factors of 10. And what you see when you plot it this way is something remarkable. Here's maybe the most complex and diverse phenomenon in the universe, metabolism, life from stuff. And yet, despite its great complexity, its scaling is unbelievably simple. Not only that, the slope of this line is very close to 3/4. It's less than 1. One would understand in a very naive way, forgetting evolution, and that is 1 would indicate, if the slope were 1, it would say that if I double the size of an organism, I double the number of cells, I would need twice as much energy. That's what you would most naively think. Quite to the contrary, what this says, if I double the size from 2 grams to 4 grams, or 2 kilograms to 4 kilograms, doesn't matter what, I only need 75%, roughly speaking, as much energy. So there's this incredible economy of scale, 25% each time you double in size. So this is a remarkable scaling law, and it covers all of biology, from cells all the way up to ecosystems. But it's true across many other things. This is heart rate. This is a similar kind of plot. And you can see, again, very systematic behavior. And the slope of that line is 1/4. The other one was 3/4. This one is your brain. This is you, your white matter to gray matter in your brain. And you can see marvelous scaling. And the slope of that is 5/4. Here's genome length, much more, there's some noise there's much more variance, but the slope of that for genome length versus size is approximately 1/4. And finally, this is the radius of your aorta versus size, and the slope of that, again, is 3/8, the same as tree trunks. Your aorta scales the same as tree trunks. So there's this amazing universality. I could show you 50 to 75 of such plots, and they all look exactly the same. They're all straight lines when plotted this way, and they all have slopes that are simple multiples of 1/4. The whole of the ecosystem, all biology around you, is constrained by the number 4. That's the magic number of life. And the question is, where does this number 4 come from? And that comes from, it turns out, the one thing that is common across all of these systems, and that is that there's a huge number of individual components, cells in particular, and they all have to be supported roughly democratically and efficiently, and we have evolved doing that by forming networks. We are simply a bunch of networks from our circulatory to our renal system, and it is those scaling laws all can be derived mathematically based on generic principles of networks. And networks such as this, you, or this is your brain, there's your lungs, there's a tree, there's a little thing that lives inside elephants, but they're all the same across all of biology. That's inside cells. There are these networks, and the idea is they obey universal mathematics, and that universal mathematics gives rise to this scaling with this number 4, and that's what I've said here. So the other thing that happens is, and I'm going to have to go over this very quickly because I'm going to run out of time, is that this number 4 permeates everything, so that that all rates, and I've written a list here, all times and rates of all these various seemingly disparate things, all scale in the same way, given by these 1/4 powers, these 1/4 slopes on the graphs I've just shown you. And I want to give one example of it, and that is lifespan. Lifespan, the slope, that's the mathematical way of writing it, the slope of lifespan versus size has a slope of 1/4. But I just showed you that heart rate decreases with a slope of 1/4. If you multiply them together, the increase of one is cancelled by the decrease in the other, so that lifespan times heart rate is the same for all mammals. What is lifespan times heart rate? That's the number of heartbeats in a lifetime. So it says that the number of heartbeats in a lifetime is the same for all mammals, even though a shrew weighs just a few grams and its heartbeats at, I don't know, something like 1,200 times a minute, and a whale is bigger than this room, and its heart beats at about 15 times a minute. Nevertheless, in their lifespan, in some beautiful way, they have the same number of heartbeats. And there's a graph showing heartbeats versus size for a bunch of mammals, and you see it's flat, it's the same. I want to do one other thing before moving on to cities. Growth. We're all familiar, we've all scaled, we've all grown, and this is the way it works in this theory. We now have a complete theory of how all these things work based on these networks. We can apply it to many things. I could apply it to aging, I could apply it to cancer. I'm not going to go through it, but I do want to apply it to growth. And the idea is you eat, you metabolize, you send metabolic energy, so to speak, through your networks to supply cells. At the cellular level, that energy sustains cells by repairing damage and replacing ones that have died by new ones, and growing new ones. And that's what's written down there. It's allocated between maintenance and growth. And if you put that into mathematics and solve the equations, this is what you get. So here's weight versus age for us as a rat. And those points are the data points, and that line is a prediction from the theory. And the theory explains why it is that you grow quickly at the beginning, and something that presumably has bothered you all your life. Why is it that you could go on eating for the rest of your life, but you don't grow, other than a little bit this way, but you don't grow? It's bizarre that you suddenly stop at about 15. The theory automatically explains it, and it is directly related to that economy of scale, the fact that metabolic rates scale sublinearly, 3/4, less than 1. Economy of scale feeds directly into the stopping of the cessation of growth as you get bigger. So this is great for us, and it plays a crucial role in sustainability of life and why life has been sustained on this planet for 2 or 3 billion years. But it would be a disaster in a socioeconomic system. You're supposed to have continuous open-ended growth. Before going on to that, it turns out this theory is quite powerful because it only relies on 2 parameters, basically the energy needed to create a cell and the average mass of a cell, and those are universal numbers, so you can predict the growth of any organism, and then you can rescale that. There's some examples. There's a couple of mammals, a bird and a fish, and it's the same parameters, and it predicts their different growth rates, even though some things grow much faster than others. And you can rescale it. The theory tells you how to rescale it so that just as in lifespan, there is an extraordinary universality to life. I don't know if you can read this, but it's just a selection of animals, and to show that if you look at it through the right lens and not look at it just as age versus size versus age, but you rescale it in a way given by the theory, everybody grows in the same way, on a curve that is given by the theory, and that's what that is. I just flashed this on too because it also applies to things like ecosystems, but also to tumors, because tumors are a part of us, and it also does, and this is work done by some Harvard oncologists using our work. So I will miss this slide. Well, maybe I should say this is a summary of it. So we have these extraordinary scaling laws, despite the fact that we have the most complex system presumably in the universe. Biology expresses an economy of scale. The bigger you are, the less you need per cell to stay alive. Your cells work harder than your horses, but they work less hard than your dogs in a systematic way. The pace of life increases with size. I didn't emphasize that. Things slow down the bigger they are, and they live longer, but in a systematic, predictable way. Growth stops, reaches a stable size, and then you die. And all of this can be explained within this network theory, of course, I should have said at the beginning, I'm not showing any of the mathematics and the technicalities that underlie all this, and you have to take my word for it. So now I'm going to take that idea, this paradigm, which I've just sort of scratched the surface, and ask the same thing about cities. So the first thing to ask, are cities scaled versions of one another? I just showed you that despite the fact that the whale lives in the ocean and the giraffe has a long neck and the elephant a trunk, and we walk around on two legs and a mouse scurries around, we are, in fact, in terms of anything that we can measure about us, scaled versions, non-linear scaled versions of each other to a surprisingly good degree, to a sort of 80-90% degree. We are scaled versions of each other. And the question now is Detroit just a scaled down New York and a scaled up Santa Fe? Or is it just totally unique? Is each city totally unique? Well, first of all, cities, just to remind you, the biology worked because we saw that underlying it, even though they look different and they have different evolutionary histories, that it's the underlying network. And cities are network systems. It's, of course, roads and electrical lines and power lines and so forth, and they're supplied by power lines. But most important about city is not all of that stuff that we focus on, which of course is important, but much more important are the networks of social interaction. That's what this is. Each node here is a person, and those lines are the people they're connected to. It's that, and importantly, the fact that our social networks have two crucial properties. One is that we are modular. We form groups, we have families, we have departments, we have groups, and so on. We have a modular structure. And also, what is indicated here, these networks are not, can I go back with this? Yes. They're not sort of virtual in the way, when we think of the cloud and we think of social networks that way. We're not that. There's something crucial about us. We have to be standing on the ground, whether we like it or not. You have to be someplace. It doesn't matter how much you're on the internet and so on. You have to be, I don't know, in your living room, sitting on your toilet. I don't know, somewhere. You have to be somewhere in order to make an interaction. And in addition, you're not just somewhere. You have to be moving. You must move because you have to go to work, you have to go to the store, and so forth. I mean, this company exists because of that. So there are these crucial properties of these networks, and it is the crucial properties of these networks that in fact give rise to the things I'm going to show you, which are this. First, the infrastructure of a city. This is the number of gas stations versus city size, plotted in the same way I did the biology. And you can see it just looks like biology. There's good scaling. This is 4 European countries. And you can see that dotted line is if it were linear, meaning double the size of a city, you need twice as many gas stations. No, double the size of a city, of course you don't need twice as many. You have an economy of scale, and the economy of scale is the same across these 4 European countries, but what's amazing is it's true across every country. It's the same savings. Instead of 25%, it happens to be 15%. It's the same savings, whether it's France or England or the United States or Brazil or China or Japan, but it's also the same whether it's gas stations or the length of the roads or the length of the electrical lines. All infrastructure scales in the same way everywhere in the world, which is sort of amazing. And it's all with this same sublinear scaling, economy of scale, saving 15%. This is the uninteresting part of a city, because it's just like biology. The most interesting part of the city is what we're doing now. That's the whole point of a city. And it's this. It's the social networks, because it gives rise to things like what's on the left there that you can't read, wages, and on the right there is sexy, super creative people like yourselves, professional people. And you can see good evidence of scaling, but the important thing here is that this is something that you never see in biology. This is called superlinear scaling, meaning instead of the bigger you are, the less you need per capita. This is the bigger you are, the more you have per capita. The bigger you are, the higher the wages per capita. The more sexy people there are per capita. The more patents there are per capita. The more crime there is per capita. The more police there are per capita, construction per capita, the more restaurants per capita, all to the same degree, all by about 15%, no matter where you look in the world, whether you look in the United States, China, Japan, Colombia, Mexico, France, wherever we can find data. All looks the same. It's bizarre. Here's an impressionistic graph of 6 different metrics in different parts of the world, and you can see, just looking at them, they're all parallel, they're all the same, they all scale in the same way. And to put that in English, it's the good, bad, and the ugly all come together, and what it says is that on average, doubling the size of a city systematically increases all of these metrics, all socioeconomic metrics, income, wealth, patents, anything you can think of, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, all by about 15%, regardless of the city, and at the same time, it saves about 15% on the infrastructure. Cities are good. The bigger the city, the better in this sense. It's because we're very good at suppressing the bad. It's good at the individual level, greater opportunity, more wages, a buzzier life, and so on. But also collectively, we save 15%. And the question is, where in the hell did this all come from? It's the same question we had in biology. It's as if there was a convention in 1770 of all the nations of the world who got together and said the Industrial Revolution is just beginning. We're going to have lots of cities that are going to be built. Let's see how we can let's see how we should design them. We have to follow the following rules, and we all end up looking the same as urban systems. Obviously, that didn't happen. It happened organically in the same way that it organically happened that all mammals are scaled versions of one another. And the question is, what is it that underlaid all this in terms of cities? And just a moment's thought, it's sort of obvious that it has to be something like the fact that the one thing that is common across all urban systems is that they're for people. They are this maybe our greatest invention, namely the invention of this marvelous machine to bring us together, to facilitate interaction, and to repeat myself, to create wealth, to innovate, create ideas. And it is the universality of those social networks, independent of culture, independent of geography, and independent of history, roughly speaking, that has given rise to these scaling laws. That is, that at this kind of coarse-grained level, that our social networks, whether you live in China, Albania, or the United States, are pretty much the same, because we all evolved pretty much the same way, and we've evolved over such an incredibly short period of time in terms of our social interactions. So the reason for the superlinear scaling is sort of obvious, and it's given by those pictures I showed of people sitting around. And that is, I talk to Ken, he talks to you, you talk to me, you talk to him, And we keep talking, we go back and forth. And of course, what it is, it's a positive feedback mechanism. We build up, and most of it, as I said earlier, is just bullshit, for want of a better word. I mean, most of the ideas. But occasionally, it produces a Ford. It produces, right? There you go. Or, you know, it produces something that's actually, you know, truly creative. And that's what cities are for, I mean, from this viewpoint. And that positive feedback gives rise to this superlinear scaling. You get more and more builds on itself, okay? And at the same time, in contrast to what happens in biology, it has this extraordinary consequence that the pace of life increases in a systematic, predictable way. So here's this is very important because I'm a scientist. And, you know, one of the things, especially in these times, it's very important for me to say this. Science relies on facts and data, and it relies on making predictions, which you test. It's not politics, and it's not policy. It's something different. And it is one of the most precious things that we have done as human beings, in my opinion, is what's happened in the last 300 or 400 years, is produce science. So what's plotted here you can't see, but what's plotted here is income, GDP, crime, and number of patents produced in the US. You can see there's fluctuations, of course, but they lie on top of one another. That's the universal scaling with the slope of 1.15, this 15% added. And the question is, how do you test this? I said it comes from the social networks. How do you test it? Well, here's how you test it. Everybody in this room carries one of these. And as you all know, that every call you make and where you are is recorded, and to whom you talk is recorded, and how long, it's all there. So the work I'm going to talk about now is work that was done in collaboration with some friends, colleagues at MIT, who had access to these this is big data, this is billions and billions of phone calls analyzed, because we can use those phone calls to determine the number of interactions between people as a function of city size. So I'm not going to go into the details of that. And when you do that, this is what you find on the right. What's plotted there is the number of interactions, number of social interactions versus cities. So you can see it's got the same slope. It is. It's the prediction. It's got the same slope of this added 15%. Number of interactions increasing. Now, this is the mobility in cities. You can produce an absolutely phenomenal theorem about the movement of people in cities, which is quite extraordinary. It says that if you take some place in Detroit and you ask how many people are coming from 1, 2, 3, 10, 100, 500 kilometers away to that place in Detroit once a day, once a month, once a year, once every 10 years, here's the answer. It goes the inverse square of the distance times the inverse square of the number of times they visit. An extraordinarily simple prediction, ridiculously simple, and here's the data. And here it is. This is from data from Boston, Massachusetts, Lisbon, Portugal, Dakar, Senegal, and Singapore, and they're all exactly the same. This is just people moving in cities. So and here is deconstructing the city. That's many, many places in Boston, and this is many, many places in Singapore, and all those lines are following exactly the prediction of the theory. So you tell me a place in Detroit, I will tell you how many people are coming from 7 kilometers away 14 times a year. It's amazing. That should be useful to Ford Motor Company, you would think, since you're supposed to be dealing with transportation. Okay, I'm going to miss this out. This is the pace of life speeding up. It speeds up, and I'm going to miss this. I'm sorry. This is because I do want to do this last bit on growth. And that is, growth for cities works in the same way. The social metabolism of the city, which is everything that comes into it, including the not just money, but resources and so on, gets allocated between maintenance and growth of new material, both in terms of the maintenance of people and the maintenance of the infrastructure, the growth of new people, and the maintenance and the growth of infrastructure. All of this has to be put into this. I'm not going to go into it obviously in any detail. And that's what we got for biology. It stopped growing. The superlinear behavior gives rise through the network, gives rise to the thing on the left. It's very satisfying. Superlinear behavior coming from the positive feedback mechanisms in networks gives rise to faster than exponential growth, quite different than we see in biology, but exactly what we see in our socioeconomic systems, and particularly in cities. This is fantastic, and I'm not going to show you data to support it. You have to believe me, but you're familiar with it. But it has a fatal flaw, and that is that dotted line, and that's called a finite time singularity. And what it says is that in some finite time, the system will collapse. That's why it's called a finite time singularity. It could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and that's what that graph is on the right. It says when you approach that, you will collapse. And that's very bad. And how do we avoid that? This is how you avoid it. This is just a cartoon version. You can see this is one of these metrics. It could be the GDP, it could be the number of AIDS cases, doesn't matter. It grows and it would eventually hit that singularity and collapse. And you recognize that you have grown under a certain given paradigm, because we assume that, roughly speaking, nothing much has changed. You've discovered coal. You may have discovered bronze 10,000 years ago. You may have invented computers, invented IT, but that's the paradigm. So what that suggests that in order to avoid collapse, you have to reinvent yourself. You start over again. Before you hit the singularity, you have to reinvent yourself, and then you start over again. And then, of course, the thing repeats itself. You would collapse, so you better make another paradigm shift and make another major innovation, and so you can continue, and so forth. So there's a theorem that if you want, I'm sorry, you can't read that. If you want unbounded growth, if you want to keep growing, and you can consider this both at everything from at a personal level to the level of a company to the level of a city, if you want to keep growing, open-ended growth, then you require accelerating cycles of innovation, and they follow in this coarse-grained way, laws. And here, this is not my data. I don't know who this guy is. I got it on the web. And what this is the time, I don't know if you can read this, the time it took to reach 10 million customers for the telephone, cable TV, fax, and so on. And those times are getting shorter and shorter and shorter, and they follow exactly this law that I just showed back here, following this. They follow exactly this. And here it is, plotted in a logarithmic way. And I know I'm getting late. You're going to stop me talking, so I'm going to miss it. But suffice it to say, it finishes, it does this cycle of innovation that you require, follows the predictions of this theoretical framework. I'm going to finish up very quickly, talk briefly about companies, because since I'm in a big company that's had an illustrious history. First, one of the interesting things about the number of firms in a city, number of companies in a city, is that it's linear. So this is just an interesting fact, that if you increase the population of a city by 20, you have a new company. Every time you increase by 20, you have a new company. Could be a big company like Ford, could be some one or two people company. But that's what it is. The data is very strongly supportive of it. I don't have time to go into diversity and the importance of diversity, but just let me say the obvious, that it's like an ecosystem. There is a universal law of diversity, the diversity meaning the different kinds of jobs, different kinds of businesses in a community. That has to be continually increasing. This plays a crucial role in its, and I'm going to miss this out, but I want to finish up very briefly on talking about companies and the scaling of companies. This is the data I'm going to show you is based on all 30,000 US publicly traded companies since about 1950, and this is just a sampling of them. And the only point of this graph is to show this is assets and income of cities, to show they do scale after an initial period, when the companies are quite small, plotted in this logarithmic way, but they do scale, but they scale, and this is the important point, sublinearly, not like cities, but like organisms. So if you followed that through, if it was sublinearly, they would be, unlike cities which have open-ended growth, this would say that companies will eventually stop growing and then die, unlike cities which seem to have this open-ended growth. I remind you, one of the extraordinary things about a city is you can drop an atom bomb on it and 25 years later it's fine. Whereas a company, you can have a TWA or a Lehman Brothers, and you get some diddly little squiggle in the grand scheme on the stock market, and boing, they're dead. Companies are fragile, cities are robust. So here's all of them. You can see there's I don't have time to go into the statistics of this, but it's sublinear, as I say. I only show you this graph, I'm sorry, it's a bit hokey, this plot, to show you the blue and the red. The red is the United States, and the blue is 15 years of the Chinese stock market. It follows exactly what the United States has been doing. But here's the point I want to make. This is all 30,000 US publicly traded companies plotted in terms of their growth. This is the sales versus their age, their time, just a spaghetti plot. So it goes from 1950 roughly up to the present. And you can see on the same plot, these jockey stick, these ones at the bottom here growing, and those ones like, I hate to say it, Ford Motor Company, just going very slowly up, okay, the long mature ones. And this has been adjusted for inflation, but, here it is. And I have Ford on here, that's why I showed this. Here they are, just some of the biggest companies. You are that yellow thing there. I don't know if you can see that, the third one from the top. But you can see all companies go roughly to $500 billion, roughly speaking. And if you adjust to the GDP, everybody's flat. So if you renormalize to the GDP, no one is growing when they're old enough. You just stay there. And that red line is Boeing Aircraft Company, because they once supported this work. And I wanted to show them that they're pretty much the same as they are, and they're going to. And if it weren't, I'll get killed for saying this, and it weren't for the United States government, they would be and should be dead. But anyway, that's like your competitors, General Motors. So here's Walmart as an example. This is Walmart showing this jockey stick from 1970-94. And here, if you continue, this red line is the prediction of the theory, and you see they're bending over. They're bending over, and they will bend over, stop. And not in my lifetime, but in my children's lifetime, there will not be a Walmart. They all die. And I will show you that graph now. This is mortality of these companies. What is plotted in the top is the probability of dying, and you can see the top is 1, the flat thing is 1. And this is deconstructed into different companies, different sectors, and so on. Given how late it is, I don't have time to go into it. But the probability of dying is 1, and you can do an analysis on this, and you discover that the half-life of a US publicly traded company is just about 10 years. So Ford is a huge outlier, and hopefully it will go on forever. But it does. But you know, I have a certain philosophy, by the way. No, I should say this. I have a certain philosophy. We don't care. We shouldn't care about companies. We should care about the people. and ideas. That's what we should care about. And if it's time for a company, I mean, I sound like a rabid Republican, but if it's time for a company to go, go. Like me, I will die very soon, actually. And it doesn't matter. Because it's good that companies, because they open up the space for new innovation, new ideas. Unless you go through the process that cities and economies are continually and naturally, organically doing, reinventing themselves. And I heard this morning Ford trying to reinvent themselves, because if they don't, they will go the way of GM, meaning they would die and have to be bailed out. Hopefully not. No, I mean, what I heard this morning sounds like you're unbelievably vibrant and you have great leaders and so on. So there it is. This was deconstructed to different industries. I will finish here. One last thing. This is the graph I showed you of metabolic rate. What I didn't point out is, you may have noticed, your metabolic rate is 100 watts. Each person in this room is a light bulb. You are unbelievably efficient. But if you add up your social metabolic rate, what you really require in terms of all the lights and the cars and the streets and your homes and your refrigerators and your IT, then instead of 100 watts, if you look across here, we're at 11,000 watts. 100 times bigger than you should be, which means you've gone way up there, and we are totally out of whack with with the whole ecosystem that has evolved over the last 3 billion years. All happened in the last 200 years, all of that zooming up. And if you can turn it around and ask, how big is each person in this room really? Each person is not 100 to 200 pounds. Each of us is acting as if we're a 30,000 kilogram sort of King Kong. That's who we are. And there are 7.5 billion people on the planet who want to be like that. 3 more billion coming on who want to be like that too. Or 12 elephants, each person. And finally, in terms of this reinvention, I make the quote of the great economist, the great Chicago economist, Joseph Schumpeter. You've heard this phrase, creative destruction is the essential fact about capitalism. And more importantly, all successful people are standing on ground that is crumbling beneath their feet. I think that's true of great companies like this. I mean, taken metaphorically, you have to be continually reinventing yourself. So I'm sorry you didn't stop me, and I just barreled on.
I think everyone would agree with me to say that you've definitely given us lots to think about, and it was very inspiring. And I'm going to go back and read your book a second time now.
Well, it was meant to be provocative, too.
I think it was successful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.